It was a little after 2 in the morning when someone knocked on my front door. Rain hammered the porch so hard I could barely see through the glass. When I opened it, my daughter collapsed into my arms, her face swollen, her body shaking. She forced a prepaid phone into my hand and whispered, "Dad, don't call the sheriff. Watch the video first." I looked at the cracked screen, then at her terrified eyes. What I saw on that phone shattered everything I thought I knew about the family my daughter had married into, and by sunrise, I knew exactly who I had to call. I'm grateful you're here with me today. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching? From your city, your state, your country. I'd love to know who's in this room with me. A quick note, this story weaves fictional elements into its telling for depth and reflection. Names and places are coincidental, but everything it means to say it means sincerely. My name is Walter Greer, and I am 70 years old. I have lived long enough to know that the worst moments of your life never announce themselves. They do not send warning. They arrive at 2 in the morning in the middle of a Florida rainstorm as a sound so small you almost convince yourself you imagined it. A knock at the door, 3 soft taps, barely louder than the rain hammering my roof. I had been sitting in the kitchen with a John Grisham novel I had already read twice, a cup of chamomile gone cold at my elbow. I did not sleep well anymore, not since Margaret passed 4 years ago. The house was too quiet without her, and quiet had a way of pressing down on a man at 2 in the morning, like a hand on his chest. 3 taps again. Soft, patient. I opened the door. For one full second, my mind refused to process what my eyes were showing me. Claire. My daughter stood on my porch in the October rain, soaking wet, one arm pressed tight against her left side. Her left eye was swollen completely shut. The skin around it darkened in a way that told me this had not happened yesterday or the day before. Her right eye found mine, and what I saw in it made my heart seize so hard I grabbed the doorframe to stay upright. "Dad," she said. Her voice came out cracked and strange like a hinge that had rusted through. I stepped forward and caught her. Her body went rigid when my arms touched her left side, a sharp inhale through her teeth that told me exactly how much pain she was in. "Easy," I said, my own voice breaking. "Easy, baby, I've got you." I walked her inside and sat her in the kitchen chair closest to the light. My hands were shaking. I had not noticed them shaking until I reached up to push the wet hair from her face and saw my own fingers trembling. I made myself look, the left eye swollen shut, 3 fingers of bruising along her cheekbone, a cut on her lower lip scabbed over. When she shifted, she held her left arm against her ribcage the way a person holds themselves together when something inside has come apart. "Ribs?" I asked. 3 maybe. She winced, trying to breathe. I didn't go to a hospital. Then I saw the mark on the inside of her right wrist. A circle, perfectly round. The kind of mark that does not happen by accident. My throat closed entirely. I walked to the kitchen counter and stood there with both hands flat on the tile, staring at the faucet, breathing through my nose. My eyes burned and I blinked hard. I was not going to fall apart in front of her. She needed me to be the one thing in the room that was not broken. Claire pulled a prepaid phone from her pocket and set it on the table between us. "There's a video," she said. "Rosa recorded it. She worked at the house. She said you needed to see it." I looked at the phone, screen dark. Every part of me wanted to pick it up. I left it on the table. "Not tonight," I said. I put the kettle on. Thought about Vance Sterling. Thought about Sheriff Dale Harwick, who ate dinner on the Sterling estate every Sunday like a man collecting a paycheck in the shape of a meal. Thought about everything I could not do through official channels in Pelican Cove. The kettle whistled. I poured the water, carried both mugs back to the table, looked at my daughter, her swollen eye, her careful breathing, the burn mark on her wrist, and picked up my own phone. I did not call the police. I called Caleb. Caleb said he would be there in 40 minutes. I hung up and sat back down at the kitchen table. Claire had fallen asleep in the armchair in the living room, a blanket pulled up to her chin, her swollen face turned toward the window, where the rain was beginning to ease. Her breathing was shallow and careful, each exhale a small, controlled thing, the way people breathe when their body has learned that breathing too deeply comes with a price. I watched her sleep, and I felt something move through me that I did not have a clean word for. It was not anger, not yet. Anger would have been easier. This was something older and heavier, the particular grief of a man who sees the consequences of his own silence sitting in his living room with 3 cracked ribs. I picked up my cold chamomile and drank it without tasting it and let the memories come. 3 years ago, on a Saturday in late September, I had driven 4 hours north to Pelican Cove for my daughter's wedding. The Sterling estate sat on 11 acres of waterfront property on the southern edge of Manatee County, where the bay opened up wide and blue, and the kind of money that built houses like that made sure the view stayed unobstructed by anything as common as a neighbor. The main house was white stucco and imported marble, 3 stories with a wraparound veranda and a dock long enough to berth a vessel that most people would have called a yacht without embarrassment. I had worn my one good suit, navy blue. Margaret had picked it out for a cousin's funeral 6 years before, and I had never found occasion to wear it since. I remember standing at the edge of the reception tent holding a glass of champagne. I had no interest in drinking, watching men in suits that cost more than my truck shake hands with both palms the way powerful men do, when they want you to know they are being sincere. And then Vance Sterling had walked toward me across the manicured lawn, hand already extended, smile already in place. He was 65 then. Tall, silver-haired, the kind of tan that comes from a boat rather than a tanning bed. He shook my hand with exactly the right pressure, firm enough to signal confidence, not so hard as to signal aggression. His eyes were pale gray, and they did what powerful men's eyes always do when they meet someone new. They evaluated. Price, usefulness, threat level. 3 seconds, maybe 4. And then the smile widened a fraction, and I knew I had been sorted. Walter Greer. He said like my name was something he had been looking forward to saying. Claire talks about you constantly. It's wonderful to finally put a face to the man. Mr. Sterling, I said. Vance, please. He clapped me on the shoulder. We're family now. I smiled because Claire was 20 feet away in her dress and her happiness, and I was not going to be the one to put a shadow across that day. But I want to be honest about something, because this story does not work. Unless I am honest, I did not trust Vance Sterling in the first 4 seconds of knowing him. There was nothing I could point to. Nothing overt, nothing provable. Just a coldness behind those gray eyes that his smile could not quite reach, and a quality to his attention that reminded me less of a father welcoming a guest and more of a man assessing an asset. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself a lot of things that day. Julian was different, or seemed to be. He was 32, then dark-haired and genuinely warm, in a way his father was not, with an easy laugh, and the kind of attentiveness to Claire that made me want to believe I had misjudged the family entirely. He looked at my daughter the way a man looks at something he cannot believe is real. I had seen that look before. I had worn it myself, 38 years ago, looking at Margaret across a church basement in Bradenton. I wanted it to be enough. I drove home that Sunday afternoon, telling myself it was enough. The first sign came 6 months later, small enough to explain away. Claire called on a Tuesday evening, and her voice was different. Not sad I would have recognized sad. It was flat. The particular flatness of a person who has learned to be careful about what they let show over the phone. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing. The weather in Pelican Cove, a recipe she had tried, a book I was reading, and when we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time, trying to name what I had heard in her voice and failing. Margaret would have known immediately. Margaret always knew. But Margaret was gone, and I was just a 70-year-old man sitting alone in a kitchen in Bradenton, telling himself his daughter was probably just tired. The calls grew shorter after that, then less frequent. When I drove up to visit the following spring, Claire met me in the driveway before I could ring the bell, and she hugged me quickly and steered me toward the garden rather than inside, and I noticed that she kept one eye on the front door the entire time we talked. I asked her how she was sleeping. She said, "Fine, great, wonderful." Her left hand covered her right wrist the whole conversation. I did not ask about the wrist. I told myself I was respecting her privacy. I told myself she was an adult woman and it was not my place. I told myself if something was truly wrong, she would tell me. I told myself every comfortable lie that was available to a man who was afraid of what the truth might require of him. The last time Claire visited me here 14 months ago, October, the same time of year. As tonight she sat at this exact kitchen table and drank coffee and told me everything was fine. Her smile did not reach her eyes. Her laugh came a half second too late, the way a person laughs when they have been practicing normal for so long that normal has become a performance. I almost said something. I had the words right there sitting in my throat, Instead, I refilled her coffee and asked about the garden at the Sterling estate, and she described the roses along the south wall for 10 minutes, and I listened and I said that sounded lovely, and she left at 4 o'clock, and I stood on the porch and watched her drive away, and felt the specific dread of a man who has just let the most important conversation of his life not happen. 14 months. I sat in my kitchen now in the dark, listening to my daughter's careful, shallow breathing from the living room, and I pressed my palms flat against the table, and I let myself feel the full weight of those 14 months without flinching away from it. Then I heard gravel under tires in the driveway. I looked at the clock on the microwave. 3:47. Caleb had made it in 38 minutes. I stood up, pushed the memories down to somewhere I could deal with them later, and went to the door. Through the frosted glass, I could see his silhouette, broad-shouldered, unhurried, the same way he had moved through every difficult situation I had ever seen him in, like a man who had decided a long time ago that panic was a luxury he could not afford. I opened the door before he could knock and wake Claire. Caleb Marsh looked at my face for exactly 1 second. "How bad?" he said quietly. My throat tightened so hard the words would not come out right. I stepped back and let him in. "Bad enough," I said. "Bad enough that I didn't call the police." Caleb nodded once slowly, the way a man nods when he has already understood something before it was said out loud. "Then tell me what you need," he said, "and let's get her somewhere safe before sunrise." Caleb's cabin sat at the end of a dirt road 30 miles east of Bradenton, past the orange groves and the cattle gates and the kind of flat, dark Florida wilderness that swallowed sound whole. No neighbors, no streetlights, no security cameras mounted on anything, because Caleb Marsh had spent 22 years in the Marine Corps, developing a thorough distrust of anything that recorded. We got Claire inside just before 5 in the morning. She was half awake, leaning against me with her good side, her feet finding the porch steps by instinct more than sight. Caleb held the door. He did not say anything. When he saw her in the light, his jaw tightened a single hard contraction, and then his face went calm and deliberate, the way I had seen it go. Calm in the 2 decades I had known him. That stillness was not coldness. It was the opposite. It was a man taking something that wanted to become rage and pressing it down into something useful. He set Claire on the cot in the back room and opened his first aid kit on the table beside her. "Can I take a look?" he asked her directly, his voice low and even. Claire nodded, her eyes filling again. "It's the ribs, mostly," she said. "Left side." "I know," Caleb said. "I can see how you're holding yourself. Been holding yourself like that since you walked in." He worked quickly and carefully, his big hands surprisingly gentle, wrapping her ribs with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this in conditions considerably worse than a clean back room in central Florida. Claire hissed once and grabbed the edge of the cot with white knuckles, and Caleb said, almost done, you're doing great," in a steady voice that did not waver once. When it was finished, Claire lay back against the pillow and let out a long, shuddering breath that was equal parts relief and exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't mention it," Caleb said. He pulled the blanket up to her chin, the way you would for a child. "You sleep. Nothing's going to happen to you here." She was out within 4 minutes. Caleb and I took our coffee to the front porch. The sky was beginning to gray at the edges, that first pale suggestion of dawn that the Florida scrub always caught before anything else. We sat in 2 wooden chairs that had been on that porch since before Caleb's wife left, and neither of us spoke for a moment, and it was the kind of quiet that exists between men who have known each other long enough to understand that some things have to be said carefully. "Tell me," Caleb said. I told him, all of it, the phone, the video. I had not watched the ribs, the burn mark on her wrist, the Sterling name, Sheriff Harwick, the judges. Caleb listened without interrupting. When I finished, he turned his coffee mug in his hand slowly around and around. "Local law is useless," he said. It was not a question. "Worse than useless," I said. "Harwick will have a call into Vance Sterling before I reach the end of my driveway. State level." "That's what I'm thinking. There's a task force agent, Devin Pryor, financial crimes. He's been trying to build a case on Sterling for 3 years and keeps losing it. I think I know why." Caleb nodded slowly. "You need me to go with you to see him. I need you to stay with Claire," I said. "And I need whatever you have on Sterling. Tommy found something last month. You mentioned it on the phone in August. The USB. Something shifted in Caleb's expression. He set his coffee down on the porch railing and stood up. He went inside without a word, and I heard the sound of a drawer being pulled open. He came back with a piece of paper in one hand and a USB drive in the other. The paper was old, the fold lines soft with handling. He held it out to me, and I took it. Sterling Development Corporation, Land Acquisition Agreement, dated March 2009. At the bottom, a signature I recognized, shaky, unsteady. The handwriting of a man in his late 70s who had trusted the wrong person with a pen. Caleb's father. He signed 40 acres over for $60,000, Caleb said. His voice was flat and precise, the way voices get when the emotion behind them has been compressed for a very long time. Land that appraised at $400,000. His lawyer turned out to be on Sterling's payroll. My father didn't know that until 6 months later when he tried to contest it. He paused. He didn't live to see the case dismissed. My chest ached for him. Caleb, don't. He held up one hand. I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you so you understand this isn't just your fight. His eyes met mine, steady and certain. Hand me that USB. Tommy put everything he found in there. It's yours. I left the cabin at 6:30 while Claire was still sleeping, and Caleb was making eggs on the cast iron skillet he had owned since the 90s. You need to eat before you go, he said without turning around. I'll eat when I get back. He turned around then, looked at me with the particular expression he reserved for when he thought I was being stubborn in a way that was going to cost me. Walter. I'll eat when I get back, I said again, and picked up my keys. Rosa Delgado lived on the east side of Pelican Cove in a neighborhood that the Sterling development money had never bothered to reach. Small houses on small lots, most of them well kept, in the way of people who take pride in what little they have: painted shutters, potted geraniums on the front steps, an American flag on a pole that someone straightened every morning. Her address was on file with the county tax office. It took me 4 minutes to find it the night before on my phone. I pulled up at 7:03 and sat in my truck for a moment, looking at the house. The porch light was still on. The curtains were drawn. A pair of sneakers sat by the front door toes, out the way you leave shoes when you plan on wearing them again soon. Everything about the exterior of that house looked like Tuesday morning, like any other Tuesday morning. I knocked, waited, knocked again harder. Nothing. I tried the door. It swung open without resistance, and the smell that came out was coffee. Fresh coffee, still warm, the kind that had been made within the last 2 hours. Rosa, I called into the house. My name is Walter Greer. I'm Claire's father. I'm not here to hurt you. I just need to know you're safe. The house answered me with the particular silence of a place that has recently been occupied and is no longer. I stepped inside. The living room was neat couch cushions, straight a library book on the end table, with a receipt used as a bookmark. In the kitchen, a mug sat on the counter with an inch of coffee still in it, gone lukewarm. A dish towel hung over the oven handle. Rosa's purse was not on the hook by the door. That was the first thing I checked. Her purse was gone, her coat was gone, but the sneakers were still on the porch, and a phone charger was still plugged into the wall beside the refrigerator. And the library book was still open to page 147. She had left in a hurry, but not in a panic. There is a difference, and it matters. A panicked person knocks things over. A panicked person leaves the coffee on and the door unlocked because their hands are shaking too hard to manage ordinary objects. Rosa's coffee was off. Rosa's door had been unlocked deliberately, I realized, unlocked so that the right person could walk in and find what she had left behind. It was on the kitchen table, a white envelope unsealed, no name on the outside. I sat down and opened it. Inside were 31 pages of yellow legal paper, covered front and back in small, careful handwriting. Dates going back 26 months, names, descriptions written in the precise economical language of someone who had taught herself to observe and record without letting emotion make the words imprecise. October 14th. Mr. J came home at 2:15. A.M. strong smell of alcohol. Raised his voice in the upstairs hallway for approximately 4 minutes. Mrs. S. did not come down to breakfast the following morning. February 3rd. Observed bruising on Mrs. S.'s left forearm when she reached for a glass at dinner. She pulled her sleeve down immediately and did not look at me. June 22nd. Mrs. S. asked me not to mention to Mr. J. that her father had called. She asked me twice. Her hands were shaking when she asked. I read every page. By the time I reached the last one, my jaw was aching from being clenched so long, and my eyes were burning in a way that had nothing to do with the early morning light coming through Rosa's kitchen curtains. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes for a moment and breathed through my nose until the burning eased. At the bottom of the last page, Rosa had written a note in different ink blue instead of black, added later. Maybe recently, Claire told me about you. She said if anything ever happened and she needed help, her father would be the right person to call. She said you were the kind of man who figured things out quietly. I hope she was right. I hope you find this. I am sorry I cannot be there. I did not think it was safe to stay. I read that paragraph 3 times. My daughter had told this woman, this 28-year-old woman who cleaned the Sterling house and cooked the Sterling meals and watched everything from the margins of every room, that her father was the kind of man who figured things out quietly. Claire had believed that about me, even when I had given her very little recent evidence for it. I folded the pages carefully and put them in the inside pocket of my jacket close to my chest. Then I looked at the bottom of the last page again, below Rosa's note. She had written a list of names under the heading, "Who Else Knows?" 3 names. 2 of them I did not recognize. The third one made me go very still. Frank Greer, my brother. I sat in Rosa Delgado's kitchen with my hands flat on her table and stared at my brother's name in a stranger's handwriting and felt something cold move through me that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. I folded the pages carefully and put them in the inside pocket of my jacket close to my chest. I stood up and walked out of Rosa Delgado's house into the October morning. I had a call to make, and it was not going to be a pleasant one. Port Manatee at midnight looks like the edge of the world. The container yards go dark except for the security lights strung along the fence line, orange and sparse, and the water beyond the breakwall moves black and heavy with the tide. I pulled into the far end of the visitor parking lot at 11:58 and cut my headlights and sat with the windows down, listening to the low groan of a cargo ship working its way out toward the Gulf. A pair of headlights turned in at midnight exactly. The car that parked beside mine was a 4-door sedan government gray, the kind of vehicle specifically designed to be forgotten the moment you stopped looking at it. The man who stepped out was around 45 medium height, wearing dark jeans and a plain jacket over a collared shirt. No badge visible, nothing that announced what he was. He moved with the unhurried precision of someone who had learned a long time ago that urgency was something you felt on the inside and never showed on the outside. He knocked twice on my passenger window. I unlocked the door. Devin Pryor got in and pulled the door shut and sat for a moment, looking straight ahead through the windshield at the dark water. "Mr. Greer," he said. His voice was measured quiet, the kind of voice built for rooms where things were said that could not be unsaid. "Agent Pryor," I said, "thank you for coming. You said it was about Sterling." He turned to look at me then, and I saw that his eyes were dark brown and extremely tired, in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. I've been waiting 3 years for someone to say those words to me, with something in their hand worth looking at. I took out my phone and pulled up the video Rosa had recorded. I did not watch it with him. I looked out the windshield at the water and listened to the audio, the voices, the sounds, the 38 seconds that had driven my daughter 1,400 miles through the night, and I kept my hands pressed flat on my thighs, and I breathed through my nose until it was over. Pryor watched the entire thing without a word. 3 minutes and 22 seconds. When it ended, he handed the phone back to me. His jaw was tight, a single rigid line from ear to chin. "How is she?" he asked. "She's injured," I said. "She'll recover." I paused. "The other things take longer." Pryor nodded. He looked back out at the water, and for a moment the only sound was the distant ship and the water moving against the dock pilings. Then he said, "I've been building a case on Vance Sterling since 2022. Financial crimes, money laundering through real estate development, tax fraud, bribery of public officials." He said it the way a man recites something he has recited so many times, it has worn grooves into his thinking. Every time we get close, something happens. A witness recants. A document goes missing. A warrant gets challenged on a technicality by a judge who ate dinner on Sterling's dock the previous weekend. "Harwick," I said. "Sheriff Harwick is one piece of it." Pryor's voice tightened just slightly. "Sterling has people at every level of Manatee County. It's not corruption the way people imagine corruption, some envelope of cash in a parking garage. It's more like weather. It's just the atmosphere of the place. Everyone breathes it and nobody talks about it because talking about it would mean admitting they've been breathing it." He stopped. Then, with a deliberateness that told me he had considered whether to say this next part, "Sterling also has contacts in Tallahassee. He's had 2 separate recommendations for my promotion, blocked in the past 4 years. People above me in the chain who owe him favors I will never be able to fully document. I looked at him. Are you telling me that, so I understand your motivation? He met my eyes. I'm telling you, so you understand, I won't stop. A beat. Does the distinction matter to you? I thought about it honestly. No, I said. A man with a personal reason to finish something is more reliable than a man doing it out of abstract principle. Abstract principle has a way of bending when things get hard. Something that was almost a smile moved across Pryor's face and was gone. The video gives me probable cause to open a formal investigation. He said, shifting into a different register, precise professional. But that alone gets us Vance Sterling nothing. Julian faces charges, but Vance insulates himself 10 layers deep from anything Julian does. What I need is financial documentation, something that connects the money to the man directly. He paused. Do you have anything else? I reached into my jacket and handed him the USB Tommy had prepared. Land Records Shell Company filings, transaction histories going back to 2017. My source is a third-year law student who knows what he's looking for and knows how to stay inside the public record. Pryor turned the USB in his fingers, and the 31 pages of handwritten testimony from the housekeeper in my inside pocket. I'll need copies. He pocketed the USB. Mr. Greer, I can build this case, but I need the first move to come from outside my office. If it originates with me, Sterling's attorneys will see the angle, and they will bury us in motions before we get within a mile of a courtroom. I need civilian action first, something that forces Sterling to react. And when he reacts, I need to be there to catch what falls out. I understand, I said. How long do you need to prepare? 72 hours to get the electronic surveillance authorization in place. After that, he opened the passenger door and stepped out into the night air. Then he leaned back in one hand on the roof. After that, Mr. Greer, every move Sterling makes trying to protect himself becomes another nail. I need him scared and moving. Can you make that happen? I looked at him steadily. That, I said, is exactly what I intend to do. Pryor held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then he straightened up. One more thing, he said. My wife Nora is a nurse. If your daughter needs medical attention beyond what you've been able to manage, Nora can be at that cabin tomorrow morning. No hospital records, no paper trail. I felt something loosen in my chest that had been wound tight since 2 a.m. Tell her I said thank you, I said. Pryor nodded once, closed the door, walked back to his car without looking back. I sat alone in the parking lot and listened to the water, and thought about 72 hours and what a man could set in motion in that time if he was very careful and very cold about it. I started the truck and drove back toward Bradenton. I had one more stop to make before sunrise. One more conversation I had been avoiding for far too long. Earlier that morning, long before the drive to Port Manatee, I had made one more stop I had been avoiding for too long. Frank Greer lived 40 minutes south of Bradenton in a house that looked exactly like the man who owned it. Orderly, self-contained, every book on the shelf, arranged by subject, and then by author, every dish washed and put away before he sat down to eat the next meal. I had always admired that about my brother. I had also always found it faintly exhausting. I knocked at 6:45 in the morning. The porch light was already on. Frank answered the door before I could knock a second time, which told me he had not been sleeping either. He was 74 years old, 2 inches taller than me, with the same gray eyes we had both inherited from our mother, and a face that had learned over 50 years of practicing law to give very little away. He looked at me standing on his porch in the early morning light, and something moved across his face. Not surprise, not relief, not guilt, but a complicated mixture of all three that he was not quite fast enough to put away before I saw it. "Walter," he said. "You knew," I said. I had not planned to start that way. I had driven the 40 minutes from Bradenton rehearsing a more measured opening, something that would give him room to explain before I made up my mind. But I was running on no sleep, and the image of Claire's face in my kitchen doorway and 31 pages of Rosa Delgado's careful handwriting. And when Frank opened the door, and I saw that flicker in his eyes, every measured word I had prepared went straight out of my head. Frank stepped back from the door. "Come inside." The kitchen smelled like coffee and toast. 2 cups were already on the table. He had known I was coming, or he had suspected, or he was a man who simply always set 2 cups because the habit of hospitality ran deeper than the specific expectation of a guest. With Frank, it was impossible to know. I sat down. He sat across from me. He folded his hands on the table in front of him, the way he used to fold them before oral arguments, and I watched him decide how to begin. "Vance Sterling called me," he said, "the morning after it happened." The words landed in my chest like something thrown hard. "He called you," I said. "Yes." "How did he even have your number?" "He has everyone's number, Walter." Frank's voice was tired in the deep, specific way of a man who has been carrying something heavy for too long and has stopped being able to feel the weight of it. That's what money does in a place like Pelican Cove. It doesn't just buy things. It maps everything. It knows every connection before you do. What did he say? Frank unfolded his hands and wrapped them around his coffee cup. He was very polite, very measured. He said there had been an incident involving Claire and Julian, that it was a private family matter that was being handled internally, and that he wanted to reach out personally to assure me that Claire was being well taken care of. He paused, and then he said, very quietly, very pleasantly, that he hoped we could all be adults about the situation, and that he had always found that private resolutions were so much less painful for everyone involved than the alternative. My jaw tightened until my back teeth hurt. "He offered you money," I said. Frank nodded slowly. "He mentioned that he would be happy to discuss whatever arrangement might make Claire more comfortable going forward. He used the phrase, make whole. He said he wanted to make our family whole." The coffee cup in front of me had gone blurry. I blinked hard, pressed my lips together, and breathed through the heat that had risen behind my eyes. "And you didn't tell me," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. Frank's hands tightened around his cup. "No, Frank." I leaned forward. "She was in that house. While you were sitting on this information, she was still in that house." "I know." His voice cracked on the 2 words, a small fracture quickly controlled, but it was there, and I heard it, and I think it cost him more than he had expected. "Walter, I know. I told him no. I told him flat out no, that his money was not something I wanted anywhere near my family," and I hung up. He looked at the table. "And then I sat here, and I told myself you would handle it, that Claire would leave on her own, that it wasn't as bad as it sounded, that Sterling wouldn't dare escalate." His voice dropped to something just above a whisper. "I told myself every comfortable thing I could find." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a mockingbird started up somewhere in the live oak by the window, running through its whole catalog of borrowed songs, oblivious to the 2 old men sitting in silence at a kitchen table, with the weight of a year's worth of wrong decisions between them. "I was afraid," Frank said. He looked up at me, and his gray eyes were wet at the corners in a way I had not seen since our mother's funeral. "Not for myself, for you. I know what you look like when you've made up your mind to do something, Walter. I've known since we were boys, and I was afraid that if I told you, you would do something that would land you in a cell and leave Claire with no one." I sat with that for a long moment. Then I reached into my jacket and pulled out the civil lawsuit paperwork Tommy had prepared, 12 pages already flagged at the signature lines in 3 places. I slid it across the table. Frank looked down at it. His jaw worked. He reached up and touched the corner of the first page with 1 finger very lightly, the way you touch something you're not sure is real. "Tommy found a defect in every land acquisition Sterling made between 2017 and 2021, I said. "The notarizations are invalid on 6 of the contracts. That includes 2 properties in Manatee County that are currently in active development. A civil suit creates a public record, puts Sterling's transactions under a court-ordered microscope, and gives Devon Pryor's task force a legal avenue to request documents they can't currently compel." Frank picked up the papers and read. He read all 12 pages without speaking, his eyes moving with the focused, absorbing attention of a man who had spent 50 years reading things that mattered. When he finished, he set them down. He reached into the pen holder on the kitchen counter. It was shaped like a lighthouse, a gift from our mother that he had kept for 40 years, and he took out a pen. He signed all 3 flagged pages without a word. I gathered the papers and was sliding them back into my folder when the front door opened and a young man I recognized as Caleb's son walked in with a laptop bag over one shoulder and 2 coffees from a drive-thru in his hand. Tommy Marsh was 22, with his father's broad shoulders and his mother's quick eyes. He set a coffee in front of Frank, one in front of me. and opened his laptop on the table like a man who had been invited to a meeting he had already prepared for. "I found something else last night," he said, pulling up a spreadsheet dense with transaction records. "Every major sterling land deal for the past 7 years, the same name signs off on the internal financial authorization every single time." He turned the laptop to face us and pointed to a cell in the middle of the screen. "Gideon Rourke, Chief Financial Officer, Sterling Development Corp." "He's not just the accountant," Tommy said. "He's the one man who has touched every transaction, every shell company, every offshore transfer, every payment that doesn't appear in the public filings." He looked at me steadily. "If there's a paper trail that leads directly to Vance Sterling, it runs through Gideon Rourke." I looked at the name on the screen. And then I remembered the wedding reception 3 years ago. A man standing alone at the far edge of the tent near the bar, holding a glass of wine. He wasn't drinking, watching Claire laugh at something Julian had said. Watching her with an expression that I had registered and not understood at the time. Not threatening, not inappropriate. Sad. The expression of a man watching something he cared about, and knowing already that something was wrong. "Tommy," I said, "can you find out where he lives?" 72 hours is a long time to sit with a plan, and a short time to make one work. I spent most of day 2 at Caleb's cabin going over everything Tommy had compiled on the USB Transaction Records Shell Company. Registration's the chain of notarized documents with the defective signatures that Frank had already flagged for the civil filing. Nora Pryor arrived at 8 in the morning with a medical bag and a casserole dish, and the particular no-nonsense warmth of a woman who had spent 20 years as an emergency room nurse and had learned that the most useful thing you could offer a person in crisis was competence rather than sympathy. She examined Claire, thoroughly confirmed the rib assessment, and changed the dressing on Claire's wrist without being asked and without making it a thing. "She needs rest more than anything," Nora told me in the kitchen, keeping her voice low. "And she needs to know she's safe. Those 2 things will do more than any medication I can give her." "She's safe here," I said. Nora looked at me with the direct measuring gaze of a woman who had heard a lot of people say things they meant in the moment. "Make sure it stays that way," she said. Then she unpacked the casserole and made herself at home in Caleb's kitchen, like she had been there 100 times. By the time I drove back to Bradenton that evening, I had the plan in my head, the way you carry a map, not written down. Not on any device, just memorized and folded and stored, somewhere that couldn't be found without my permission. On the evening of day 3, Caleb and I sat in his garage workshop with 2 laptops and a prepaid router we had paid cash for at a truck stop on Route 41. "You ready?" Caleb asked. "Ask me again in an hour," I said. "If this works, yes. If it doesn't, we'll have wasted the element of surprise." "It'll work." Caleb cracked his knuckles and flexed his fingers over the keyboard with an ease that still surprised me after all these years. People looked at Caleb Marsh, the big hands, the permanent grease under his fingernails, the workshop full of engine parts, and assumed a certain kind of man. They were not wrong exactly. They just missed a few chapters. "The IP routing is clean, 3 hops through servers in different states. By the time anyone traces it, we'll be drinking coffee." "If famous last words," I said. He grinned, a rare thing wide and genuine. "Walter, I spent 12 years doing signals intelligence for the Corps. Trust me on the routing." I trusted him on the routing. At 9:47 p.m., we uploaded the video to 3 separate platforms simultaneously. Rose's footage carefully edited every frame containing Claire's face, removed the audio partially filtered to obscure her voice. What remained was enough the interior of the housekeeper's quarters in the Sterling estate voices that a Pelican Cove jury would recognize, and 41 seconds of footage that made the nature of what had happened in that house unmistakably clear, without showing a single identifiable image of my daughter. At 9:48, I sent a separate encrypted file to Marcus Webb's secure mailbox at the Bradenton Herald. Marcus Webb had been trying to crack the Sterling story for 3 years, with nothing but rumors and sealed court records. The file contained the video, Rose's 31 pages, and a single line of text. "You've been waiting for this. Sit on it until I tell you to move." Then we waited. Caleb made coffee. I sat in the wooden chair by the workbench and watched the view counter on the first platform tick upward slowly at first, then faster as the shares began to compound. 10 views, 40, 200. At 11:19 p.m. the videos disappeared, all 3 platforms, simultaneously, within 4 minutes of each other. "There it is," Caleb said quietly, watching his screen. How many views before they pulled it? I asked. He checked. Combined a little over 4,000, plus however many screenshots people took before the takedown. He looked up. Pelican Cove has about 12,000 people, Walter. 4,000 views in 90 minutes means roughly a third of the town saw at least part of it before Sterling's people got to it. I thought about that. A third of a town. Neighbors' shop owners, the woman who cut Claire's hair when she was small, the man who had coached Julian Sterling's Little League team 25 years ago. People who had smiled at the Sterling name on donation plaques outside the library and the hospital wing and the youth athletic complex. People who now had a screenshot on their phone that told a very different story. My own phone buzzed on the workbench. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Saw it before the takedown. What do you need from me? I stared at the message. Then I read it again. Caleb, I said, is there any way this came through on a secure line? He looked at my screen, typed something on his laptop, waited. Yeah, he said. That's Webb. He set up a forwarding number. He's asking if he should move. Tell him not yet, I said. Tell him to hold until I give the signal. Caleb typed. Sent. 40 minutes later, my phone buzzed again, this time with a news alert from the Pelican Cove Courier's social media page. Sheriff Dale Harwick was photographed standing in front of the Manatee County Sheriff's Office, a carefully arranged expression of professional concern on his face, with Julian Sterling in handcuffs beside him. Sterling family member taken into custody in connection with domestic incident, the caption read. Sheriff Harwick confirms investigation is ongoing. I read it twice. The tightness in my jaw eased just slightly in a way that had nothing to do with relief and everything to do with recognition. Vance Sterling had done exactly what I needed him to do. He had panicked quietly the way powerful men panic, not with noise or visible disruption, but with a fast, precise application of resources to contain damage. He had gotten the video pulled. He had staged an arrest to show the town that justice was being served. He had moved Julian from exposure to control with the practiced efficiency of a man who had handled problems this way before. He had also, in doing so, put Julian Sterling into a vehicle that Caleb had already prepared for. I looked at Caleb. He was already pulling on his jacket. The crowd outside the station, I said. You know what to do. He checked his jacket pocket, patted it once. Already there, he said. He walked out into the October night, and I sat alone in the garage workshop with the hum of the router and the smell of engine oil and the quiet satisfaction of watching a plan take its first real breath. The first domino had not fallen yet, but it was leaning. Caleb sent me one text at 11:43 p.m. Done. One word. No punctuation, no elaboration, no confirmation of method or circumstance. That was how Caleb Marsh communicated. When a thing had been accomplished, he told you it was done and trusted you to understand that done meant done completely and correctly and without complication. I set my phone face down on the workbench and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since 9:47. The tracking device Caleb had placed under the rear axle of the black SUV was a civilian-grade GPS unit, the kind used by private investigators and fleet managers transmitting location data every 30 seconds to a receiver app on Caleb's phone. Under normal circumstances, placing a tracking device on a vehicle without the owner's consent would constitute a violation of federal surveillance law. These were not normal circumstances. Devin Pryor had filed for and received an electronic surveillance authorization from a state court judge, not a Manatee County judge, a Hillsborough County judge, who did not eat dinner on Vance Sterling's dock 48 hours earlier. The authorization covered vehicle tracking in connection with an active financial crimes investigation. Caleb's placement of the device was coordinated with Pryor's office, making it an extension of a lawful surveillance operation, rather than a private citizen acting unilaterally. The law applied correctly and by the right people has teeth. Pryor called me at 12:17 a.m. The vehicle is at the Sterling estate, he said without greeting. It arrived at 11:51 and has not moved since. And the county lockup, I heard him exhale. I just got off the phone with the night supervisor at Manatee County Detention Center. Julian Sterling was never booked. No intake paperwork, no cell assignment, no record of him entering the facility at all. The words settled into me with a cold, clean precision. He was never processed, I said. Sheriff Harwick performed a public arrest for the cameras and then drove the man to his father's house. Pryor's voice was controlled, but underneath the control was something tightly wound and ready to release. That is unlawful release of a person in state care, obstruction of justice, and misuse of public office. Under Florida statute, that is enough for me to walk into that building with my credentials and a state-level authority override and take command of his department. How long until you move? We're stage 2 blocks out right now. I'm waiting for your confirmation that you want to proceed. Once I walk through that door, this becomes official and irreversible. I thought about Claire asleep at Caleb's cabin with her carefully wrapped ribs and the mark on her wrist that Nora had dressed twice already. I thought about Rosa Delgado's 31 pages of handwritten dates and descriptions. I thought about Frank's signature on 12 pages of civil lawsuit documentation and Tommy's spreadsheet with Gideon Rourke's name in every cell. Proceed, I said. The Manatee County Sheriff's Office at 2:30 in the morning looks like any other county law enforcement facility, fluorescent lit, linoleum floored, smelling of burnt coffee, and the particular institutional exhaustion of people who work nights because days were not available to them. The overnight deputies were at their stations when Pryor walked through the front door with 4 members of his state task force, his credentials already in hand, his voice carrying the specific flat authority of a man who has prepared for this moment for 3 years and is not interested in discussing it. I was not there. I am telling you this the way Pryor told it to me. The following morning, sitting in his car in the parking lot of a Waffle House on Route 301, while I drank the worst coffee I had consumed in recent memory, and he talked with the steady, detailed precision of a man filing a report in his own head. The overnight sergeant asked for identification. Pryor provided it. The sergeant reached for the phone on his desk, presumably to call Harwick, and one of Pryor's team placed a hand gently but firmly on top of the receiver. Sheriff Harwick is the subject of a state-level investigation, Pryor told the sergeant. Contacting him at this time would constitute obstruction. I need you to step away from the phone, and I need everyone in this building to stay exactly where they are. The sergeant, to his credit, made a decision quickly and correctly. He stepped away from the phone. Harwick lived 8 minutes from the office. He arrived 12 minutes after Pryor's team secured the building. Either he drove slowly, or he spent 4 minutes sitting in his driveway, understanding what the lights in his building meant. He walked in through the front door in civilian clothes, a jacket pulled over a shirt that was not fully tucked in his face, set in the expression of a man trying to project authority while his stomach was doing something considerably less authoritative. He looked at Pryor. He looked at the 4 agents positioned around his bullpen. He looked at the overnight deputies sitting carefully still at their stations. "I want my attorney," he said. "Absolutely," Pryor said. "You have the right to an attorney and the right to remain silent, and anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You are not under arrest at this moment. Sheriff, you are being detained for questioning in connection with a state investigation into misconduct and misuse of public office. You are welcome to call your attorney from the interview room." He gestured toward the hallway. "This way, please." Harwick's attorney arrived 40 minutes later. He was a Sarasota criminal defense lawyer named Patterson Expensive Suit, the kind of practice calm that billed at $400 an hour. He conferred with Harwick for 20 minutes behind the closed door of interview room 2. When Patterson opened the door and told Pryor his client was ready to speak, Harwick was sitting in the chair with his hands folded on the table and the look of a man who had made a calculation and did not yet know whether it was the right one. "My client acknowledges," Patterson said, settling into the chair beside Harwick with his legal pad open, "that certain procedural irregularities may have occurred in the processing of Mr. Julian Sterling this evening. He is prepared to discuss those irregularities in the context of a broader cooperation agreement." Pryor sat down across from them, set a manila folder on the table, did not open it. "Before we discuss any agreement," Pryor said, "I want your client to listen to something." He reached into his jacket and produced a small digital recorder, set it on the table between them. Harwick looked at the recorder, his folded hands tightened against each other, the knuckles going pale. Patterson said, "Agent Pryor, if you're intending to introduce recorded material, I'll need to—" "This is not evidence being introduced into a proceeding," Pryor said evenly. "This is context. Your client may find it helpful in deciding the scope of his cooperation." He looked at Harwick directly. "Sheriff, I think you'll want to hear this before you decide how much you're willing to tell me." He pressed play. The voice that came out of the recorder was smooth measured and utterly familiar to everyone in the room. Vance Sterling. Harwick's face did not change for the first 15 seconds. Then something happened behind his eyes, not a flinch, not a collapse, but a slow interior rearrangement, the way a building's foundation shifts before anyone on the street can see what's happening to the walls. His hands still folded on the table began to tremble. I was not there to see it, but Pryor described it to me the next morning over that terrible Waffle House coffee. And the way he described it quietly without satisfaction, with the careful neutrality of a man reporting a fact, told me that what he had witnessed in that room was not a criminal being broken. It was a man realizing in real time that the person he had spent 12 years protecting had been planning to feed him to the system like a line item on a balance sheet. The trembling did not stop. Before I reveal what was on that tape and what it did to the man who heard it, drop a 9 in the comments right now, so I know you're still here with me. What you're about to hear is the moment this entire story turned. Not because of anything Walter did, because of one voice on a recording, and the man it belonged to had no idea it existed. A note before we continue, some elements of this story have been shaped for narrative purposes. Names and places are coincidental, but the truth it carries is worth your time. The voice on the recording was not loud. That was the thing Pryor kept coming back to when he described it to me the next morning. Not the words themselves, not the content, but the register. The particular unhurried quietness of a man discussing the disposal of a human being the way another man might discuss a line item on a budget review. Vance Sterling's voice on that tape was 68 years old and completely in control of itself. The exposure runs through Harwick, the voice said over the ambient sound of an air conditioning unit and the distant creak of an office chair. Dale has been compensated well enough and long enough that the paper trail, if anyone constructs one, points to him as the principal actor. Our job is to make sure that framing holds. Whatever he's been paid, whatever he's signed off on, that becomes his initiative, his corruption, his liability. The company stays clean. A pause. Then a second voice Sterling's attorney clipped in careful. And if Harwick pushes back, Vance Sterling, Dale won't push back. Dale understands which side his bread is buttered on. He's been understanding that for 12 years. The recording ended. In interview room 2, the silence that followed lasted 11 seconds. Pryor counted them. He was a man who noticed things like that, who understood that the spaces between words were where the real information lived. Harwick's attorney Patterson cleared his throat, adjusted his legal pad, opened his mouth. Harwick put his hand on Patterson's arm. It was a small gesture, barely perceptible, but it stopped the attorney mid-breath, and what came out of Harwick's mouth next came without legal filtering, without strategic positioning, without the careful grammar of a man who has been coached on what to say. How long have you had that?" Harwick asked. His voice was different now, stripped of the official authority it had carried for 12 years, down to something rawer underneath. The voice of a man from Palmetto, Florida, who had wanted to be a law enforcement officer since he was 9 years old, and had made somewhere along the way a series of decisions that had carried him very far from that. "Long enough," Pryor said. Harwick's jaw worked. His eyes moved to the recorder, then back to Pryor, then down to the table. His hands still trembling, faintly pressed flat against the metal surface as if he needed to feel something solid. "He told me last month," Harwick said slowly, "that if anything ever came up, any investigation, any outside pressure, the arrangement was that I would be the one who hadn't followed proper procedure, that it would look like individual misconduct rather than a systemic issue." He stopped. His throat moved. I told myself that was just contingency planning, that it would never actually come to that. Patterson leaned toward him and said something low and urgent. Harwick shook his head, a single sharp movement. "No," Harwick said. "No, I'm done." He looked at Pryor. "What do I need to do?" What he needed to do took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Pryor walked me through it at the Waffle House, the full scope of Harwick's cooperation, itemized and chronological, because Pryor was constitutionally incapable of telling a story out of order. Harwick had provided a complete accounting of every payment received from Sterling-affiliated entities over 12 years, totaling $437,000, distributed through a series of cash transactions and payments to a shell LLC registered in his wife's maiden name. a list of 17 separate investigations that had been delayed, misdirected, or quietly closed at Sterling's request. The access codes to a private filing system, maintained on a server in Harwick's office that contained his own records of these transactions kept, he explained with a kind of exhausted practicality, because he had always known that one day he might need them as leverage. He kept records of his own corruption, I said when Pryor told me this. The smartest thing he ever did, Pryor said, and the thing that's going to save him approximately 15 years of federal prison time. I drank my terrible coffee and thought about that. Then Pryor said, "There's something else, something Harwick told us at the end after the formal cooperation statement was signed." His voice shifted a small change in register that I had learned over the past 72 hours meant he was about to say something that mattered more than the thing before it. Julian Sterling wrote a letter, Pryor said. While he was being held in the basement of the estate, Harwick had been down there twice to check on him per Vance's instructions, and the second time he went down, Julian gave him the letter and asked him to mail it. Did he? No, he kept it. A pause. He gave it to us this morning. I set my coffee cup down. What did it say? Pryor was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the careful evenness of a man reading from a document he has already read several times and has not yet decided what to feel about. Julian wrote that he had tried to leave, Pryor said. 6 months ago. He had been planning it for longer than that, researching apartments in Tampa, opening a separate bank account in his own name, talking to a family law attorney in Sarasota about the process for separating his finances from his father's business. He paused. Vance found out. Julian doesn't know how. One morning, the separate account was frozen. A flag had been placed on it through a Sterling-affiliated bank officer. The attorney in Sarasota called to say he was no longer able to take the case. Julian's company credit cards stopped working. I pressed my fingers against my eyes. He was trying to take Claire with him, I said. It was not a question. The letter says he had been trying to get her out for the better part of a year, Pryor said quietly. He writes, another pause longer this time. He writes that the night it happened in the wine cellar, he was in the doorway, that his father had told him to stay back and he had stayed back, that he has not been able to stop seeing her face from where he was standing. Pryor's voice for the first time in our entire acquaintance lost a fraction of its careful neutrality. He says he knows that staying back is the same as participating. He says he's not writing the letter to excuse himself. He's writing it because if something happens to him in that basement, he wants someone to know that he tried. The Waffle House was beginning to fill up with the early breakfast crowd, truckers and construction workers, and a table of nurses still in scrubs from the night shift. The ordinary world going about its ordinary Tuesday morning, completely unaware that 2 men were sitting in the corner booth with a letter that had redrawn the map of a story I thought I understood. Where is he now? I asked. Julian, where is he right now? Still in the basement? Pryor said. Vance doesn't know we have Harwick. As far as Sterling is concerned, this morning is still under control. He looked at me across the table. We need to move on Gideon Rourke today. If we're going to get Julian out of that house with the hard drive before Vance understands what's happening, Gideon is the key. I nodded slowly. Outside the window, a produce truck pulled into the parking lot, and a man in a green jacket climbed out and stretched his arms over his head in the early morning sunlight, easy and uncomplicated, the way people move when they are not carrying anything. I thought about Julian Sterling in a basement, writing a letter he did not know if anyone would ever read. I thought about Claire on the cot in Caleb's cabin, breathing carefully around her ribs. I thought about the difference between a man who does a wrong thing and a man who stands in a doorway and watches it happen. And I thought about how in a court of law, and in the court of everything else, that difference matters. Tell me about Gideon, I said. Pryor's temporary field office at Port Manatee was a repurposed shipping coordinator's room on the 2nd floor of the harbor master's building. 2 folding tables pushed together a whiteboard, covered in names and arrows and dollar amounts, a coffee maker that produced something approximately 1 grade above the Waffle Houses, and 4 windows that looked out over the container yard and the gray afternoon water of Tampa Bay. I arrived at 2:15. Pryor was standing at the whiteboard with a marker uncapped, adding a number to a column I did not immediately recognize. He looked like a man who had not slept in 36 hours and had made a private agreement with himself not to acknowledge that fact until the work was finished. Harwick's records filled in the last 3 years, he said, without turning around. Before that, we have gaps, Transactions that reference accounts we can't open with what we currently have. He capped the marker and turned. Gideon Rourke can close those gaps, if he's willing. Tell me about him, I said. You said on the phone there was something I needed to know before we met. Pryor set the marker down on the table, pulled out the chair across from me, and sat in it the way a man sits when he is about to say something he has been deciding how to say for a while. Gideon Rourke has been providing information to my office since March of 2020, he said. Anonymously initially documents delivered through a blind email drop photographs of internal ledgers, copies of wire transfer authorizations. It took us 8 months to identify the source. He paused. When we approached him, he didn't deny it. He asked only one thing, that his daughter be kept entirely out of it. Something stirred in the back of my memory. The wedding, the man at the edge of the tent. His daughter, I said. Melissa Rourke, 29 years old, elementary school teacher in St. Petersburg. Pryor looked at me steadily. She and Claire were roommates their junior and senior year at the University of Florida. Melissa introduced Claire to the Sterling family at a charity event in Sarasota. She has carried that with her every day since. The air in the room felt different suddenly. Heavier, or maybe more substantial. The way air feels when you realize that the thing you thought was a coincidence was actually a thread. And the thread connects to other threads, and the whole fabric was woven long before you understood you were wearing it. Gideon watched his daughter's best friend disappear into that family, I said. Month by month, Pryor said. He told us in our first real conversation that Claire used to call Melissa every Sunday, then every other Sunday, then once a month. Then the calls stopped. Melissa told her father she thought something was wrong, but didn't know how to reach Claire without going through the Sterling household. And Gideon, who sat in the financial meetings and signed the authorizations and watched the numbers move through the shell companies, understood exactly what kind of household it was. My throat was tight. I pressed my lips together and breathed through it. He was afraid, I said. It was not an accusation. I understood fear in a way I had not understood 3 months ago. Profoundly, Pryor said. He has a daughter. He has a mortgage. He has a pension that runs through a Sterling-affiliated financial management firm, something that was arranged when he was hired and that he only fully understood the implications of years later. He leaned forward. But he started sending documents anyway, because Melissa cried on the phone to him one night about Claire, and Gideon Rourke decided that being afraid was no longer a sufficient reason to do nothing. The door opened. Gideon Rourke was 58 years old and looked like a man who had been slowly compressed by years of knowing things he could not say. Medium height, thinning gray hair, a face that had once probably been open and was now careful in the way of people who have learned that expressions cost something. He wore a gray suit jacket over a blue shirt with no tie, and he carried a leather document case in his left hand that he held with the unconscious tightness of someone gripping the one thing in a situation they felt they controlled. He saw me and stopped. "Mr. Greer," he said. His voice was quiet and careful, but underneath it something moved, a tremor of recognition that was not surprise, not quite, but the particular feeling of a thing that has been anticipated finally arriving. "You were at the wedding," I said, 3 years ago, standing at the edge of the tent near the bar. You were watching Claire." Gideon set his document case on the table, sat down slowly like a man whose knees had been giving him trouble and who had stopped mentioning it. "I was watching to see if she was happy," he said. "I had told myself that if she seemed happy, really happy, not performed happy, I would let it go. I would tell myself I was wrong about the family." He looked at his hands on the table. She laughed at something Julian said, and for about 30 seconds, I thought I was wrong. And then Vance Sterling put his hand on her shoulder, and she went completely still, and I knew I wasn't wrong at all. His voice did not break. It did something more controlled than breaking it, became very precise, very flat, the voice of a man keeping himself together through deliberate effort. "My daughter loved Claire like a sister," he said. "Melissa called me the night before the wedding and cried for 40 minutes because she was happy for Claire and terrified for her at the same time, and didn't know what to do with both of those things at once." He looked up at me. "I have spent 3 years trying to do something with them on her behalf." My chest ached with a specific clean pain, the pain of recognizing in another person the same helplessness you have felt yourself, dressed in different clothes, but identical underneath. "Gideon," I said, "I need to ask you to do something that is going to feel dangerous. Because it is dangerous. I won't pretend otherwise. He met my eyes. Tell me. I laid it out, the plan, the timeline, the specific role he would play. Walking into the Sterling estate on legitimate business using his CFO credentials and his standing Tuesday afternoon meeting as cover. Getting to the basement, opening the door, letting Julian see what was happening to his father's empire in real time on the tablet screen from a live feed Pryor's team would provide. Gideon listened without interrupting. His hands stayed flat on the table. His breathing stayed even. The only sign of what the plan was costing him internally was the way his eyes closed for 3 full seconds in the middle of my explanation, and then opened again, a single deliberate pause, like a man stepping back from the edge of something, and then stepping toward it anyway. He'll know it was me, Gideon said when I finished. After. When it all comes out, Vance will know I was the one who opened that door. Yes, I said. I was not going to lie to him about that. Gideon nodded slowly. He reached for his document case and unzipped it and took out a tablet already configured, already connected to the secure feed Pryor's team had set up. He turned it over in his hands once. Melissa is going to cry when she finds out, he said. Not distressed, almost tender, the way a father speaks about a daughter's tears when he knows they are the right kind. Probably, I said. He stood up, tucked the tablet under his arm. Mr. Greer, he said, and then stopped as if he had started a sentence and found a different one waiting for him instead. He looked at me for a moment with the exhausted, unguarded expression of a man who has been holding something for 3 years and can feel the weight of it differently now that the end is close. I should have found a way to do more, he said, earlier, when it would have mattered more. The words landed in my chest like something thrown gently. You did what you could. I said, when you could do it. That has to be enough. It has to be, Gideon, because it's all any of us ever actually have. He held my gaze for a moment longer. Then he picked up his case and walked to the door and opened it, and the afternoon light from the hallway window caught him briefly, a tired man in a gray jacket carrying a tablet toward a house he had been afraid of for years. I watched him go and thought courage almost never looks the way you expect it to. I was not there. I want to be clear about that. The way I have been clear about every part of this story that I did not witness directly. What I'm about to tell you is what Gideon told me afterward, sitting in Pryor's field office at 11 o'clock that night with a cup of coffee. He did not drink, speaking in the careful, sequential way of a man who needs to get a thing said correctly because he understands it will only be said once. Gideon arrived at the Sterling estate at 4:47 p.m. He had been arriving at the Sterling estate on Tuesday afternoons for 6 years. The gate guard, a man named Terrence, who had worked the property since before Gideon joined the company, waved him through without checking his credentials. Terrence had waved Gideon through 470-some Tuesday afternoons in a row. He saw no reason to treat this one differently. The main house was quieter than usual. 2 of the regular household staff had been sent home early. Gideon did not know why and did not ask. The housekeeper who met him in the entrance hall told him that Mr. Sterling was in a meeting on the 3rd floor and had left instructions not to be disturbed. Gideon said he understood, that he only needed to drop off the quarterly projections and pick up some files from his office on the 2nd floor. The housekeeper nodded and went back to the kitchen. Gideon did not go to his office. He went to the door at the end of the ground floor corridor, the one that looked like a utility closet and was not. And he took out the key that Harwick had described in his cooperation statement and that Pryor had obtained a copy of through the estate's property management records, and he put it in the lock and he opened the door and he went down. The basement of the Sterling estate was not a dungeon. I want to be clear about that too, because the word basement carries certain connotations that do not accurately describe the space. It was a finished room, climate-controlled, carpeted, furnished with a leather couch and a reading lamp and a small refrigerator stocked with water and protein bars. It was the kind of room that communicated through its comfort something more insidious than cruelty. It said that the person inside it was being managed rather than punished, that they were a situation being handled, not a human being who had done something wrong. Julian Sterling was sitting on the couch when Gideon came down the stairs. He had been there 48 hours. He was unshaved, his dress shirt untucked, and wrinkled, his hair unwashed. But his eyes were alert, too alert, the hyper-focused alertness of a person who has had nothing to do for 2 days except think, and who has followed every thought to its conclusion and not liked where most of them ended up. He looked at Gideon, and his jaw tightened. "Gideon," he said, His voice was flat and controlled the voice of a man who has decided that whatever happens next, he will not let anyone see him fall apart first. "What are you doing down here?" "Sitting down," Gideon said. He pulled the single chair in the room around to face the couch and sat in it, and he set the tablet on the cushion beside Julian without explanation. Julian looked at the tablet, looked at Gideon. "What is that?" "A live feed," Gideon said. "From the surveillance camera our team has had on your father's office, 21st floor, Sterling Development in Sarasota. State Task Force authorization. This is happening right now." He reached over and pressed play. The screen showed an office Julian had been in hundreds of times. He knew the carpet pattern. He knew the view from the window. He knew the arrangement of the furniture, the painting on the east wall, the credenza behind the desk, where his father kept the awards and the photographs, and the small frame print of a Winston Churchill quote that Vance Sterling had always found inspiring. The credenza was open. A state task force agent in a dark jacket was carefully removing items from it, placing each one into an evidence box, photographing it first. There were 6 agents in the office. They moved with the systematic thoroughness of people who have a list and intend to work through every item on it before they leave. Julian's face did not change for a long moment. Then his hands resting on his knees curled inward until they were fists, the knuckles draining white, and a sound came out of his chest. That was not quite a word, and not quite anything else. A short, compressed exhale like a man who has been punched and is deciding whether to fall. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. His voice had lost the control it had when Gideon came down the stairs. It was rawer now, younger sounding, the voice of someone whose careful management of his own expression has stopped working. "Since early this morning," Gideon said. "And my father is on the 3rd floor of this house, in a meeting with his attorneys." Gideon paused. "He has not come down here once, Julian. Not this morning, not this afternoon." Another pause, quieter. "I checked." Julian turned his head away from the screen, stared at the far wall of the basement room, his jaw working, his eyes bright, with something that was fighting very hard not to become tears and was losing. "He was going to let me sit here," Julian said. Not a question. The sentence of a man arriving at a conclusion he already knew and is only now permitting himself to say out loud. While he was just going to leave me here and let me be the one who... His voice broke on the last word. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth, and his shoulders shook once hard, like a man suppressing something physical. Gideon did not reach over and pat his arm. He did not say it was going to be all right. He understood that neither of those things was what the moment required. "Julian," he said, his voice was steady and direct. "There is a safe on the 3rd floor of this house, in your father's private office behind the Flemish landscape painting on the north wall. You have been in that room." Julian lowered his hand from his mouth, looked at Gideon with red-rimmed eyes. 3 years ago, Gideon continued, your father asked you to put a set of acquisition documents in that safe while he was traveling. You watched him open it beforehand to show you how. You have never forgotten the combination because it was the only time he ever trusted you with something he kept locked. Julian's breathing was ragged. His chest rose and fell in unsteady increments. "The combination," Gideon said, "opens a safe that contains a portable hard drive. That hard drive contains 7 years of financial records that do not appear in any public filing, and that your father has never shown to anyone he did not absolutely have to." He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. "If those records were in the hands of the right people tonight, your father could not place the liability for any of it on anyone else, not on Harwick, not on the company's subsidiary officers." He held Julian's gaze. "Not on you." The room held the particular silence of a decision being made. Julian stood up. His legs were unsteady after 2 days on the couch. He put one hand on the armrest to push himself upright, and when he straightened to his full height, his face was different from the face that had been sitting there when Gideon came down the stairs, still frightened, still shaking slightly in the hands. But the eyes had changed. They had the focused, narrowed look of a man who has spent 48 hours in a room with his own thoughts and has finally found the one thought he intends to act on. He looked at Gideon. "The painting on the north wall," he said. "The north wall," Gideon confirmed. Julian moved to the stairs without another word. His footsteps going up were quick and uneven. A man moving faster than his body had recalibrated, for after 2 days of stillness, driven by something that had nothing to do with his legs and everything to do with what was happening behind his eyes. Gideon sat in the basement room and listened to the footsteps cross the floor above him, listened to them continue up the next flight. And then he took out his own phone and sent a single text to Pryor's number. "He's moving." Upstairs in the room, behind the Flemish landscape painting, a safe was opening. Caleb's phone buzzed at 10:47 p.m. He was sitting at the workbench in his garage with a second cup of coffee and a topographic map of Manatee County that he had been studying with the focused attention of a man who likes to know the land before anything happens on it. I was in the wooden chair across from him, not reading the novel I had brought, staring at the wall above the workbench and thinking about Julian Sterling in a basement and a safe opening behind a painting. Caleb looked at his phone screen, set down his coffee. "He's out," he said. His voice was quiet and immediate, the voice he used when a situation had moved from planning into reality. "Signals moving, southeast from the estate hitting Cortez Road." I stood up. On the tracking screen, Pryor's team had linked Gideon's tablet signal to the same monitoring system as the GPS unit under the estate's vehicles. A single blue dot moved through the grid of Manatee County streets with the speed of a man who had made a decision and was not second-guessing it. Julian was driving fast but not recklessly. The route he was taking headed south toward I-75. "Which car?" I asked. "The backup sedan registered to a Sterling subsidiary." Caleb was already pulling up the secondary screen. "No onboard GPS from the estate system, that's why he took it. Smart." A pause. Or he remembered that one didn't have tracking from a detail his father never thought he noticed. My phone rang. Pryor. "We see him," Pryor said without preamble. "We're staged on the interstate 2 miles ahead of his projected entry point. I need you to stay on the line, Walter. If anything changes on your end, I need to know immediately." "Understood," I said. For 40 seconds, the garage was filled with the particular silence of people watching something they cannot control moving toward its conclusion. Caleb's eyes were on the tracking screen. My eyes were on Caleb's eyes, reading the information from his expression because he was closer to the screen. Then his expression changed. "Second cluster of signals," he said. "Coming up from the south. 4 vehicles moving fast, converging on his route from 2 directions." He looked at me. "That's not Pryor's team." The cold that moved through my chest was not surprise. I had known Vance Sterling for 3 years, and I had understood him for longer than that the type of man who builds contingencies inside, contingencies who has a plan for the moment his plan fails before the first plan has finished running. I had known that when Julian moved, Vance would move too. I had simply hoped Pryor would move faster. "Pryor," I said into the phone. "He's got 4 vehicles closing from the south. Private security, not law enforcement. They're going to reach him before you do." A half-second pause, the length of a man running calculations. "We're accelerating," Pryor said. "Walter, stay on the line." On the screen, the blue dot of Julian's sedan hit the I-75 on-ramp and merged into the sparse late-night interstate traffic. The 4 signals from the south were already on the interstate running north, the gap between them and Julian closing with the arithmetic certainty of physics. Caleb's jaw was tight. His right hand rested flat on the workbench beside his phone. Fingers spread, a man keeping his hands visible to himself, so they did not do something on their own. "He doesn't know they were behind him," I said. "No," Caleb said. "He's running from the house. He's not checking his mirrors for his father's people yet." He paused. "He thinks he got out clean." 3 miles, 2 miles. The signals merged on the screen into a cluster. Julian's blue dots surrounded by the 4 converging points from the south, all of them moving at highway speed through the dark stretch of a 75 that cuts through the flat heart of Manatee County between the sprawl of Bradenton and the first exit towards Sarasota. And then Julian's dot stopped moving. Not slowed, stopped. What happened? I asked, though I already understood what had happened. "That they boxed him," Caleb said. His voice was level, but underneath it something burned controlled and directed the way a fire burns when the man tending it has decided what it is for. 4 vehicles highway speed pushed him into the center lane and he had nowhere to go. He looked at the stationary dot. "He stopped on the highway, Walter." Into the phone, Pryor's voice. "We are 90 seconds out. I need you to hold the line." 90 seconds is not a long time by most measures. It is an extremely long time when 4 vehicles containing men who have been dispatched to solve a problem are parked on a dark stretch of interstate, around a car containing your daughter's husband, who is holding the only evidence that can dismantle the empire that hurt your daughter. I stood in Caleb's garage and I counted. 1, 2, 3. Caleb watched the screen without speaking, his jaw set, his hand still flat on the workbench. Neither of us said what we were both thinking, because saying it would not have changed the 90 seconds, and both of us knew it. 15, 16, 17. Prior, I said. I see it, he said. We are 60 seconds out. I have 6 units and a spike strip deployment ahead of his position. Walter? His voice shifted, took on the particular focused calm of a man who is simultaneously driving fast and thinking faster. Whatever happens in the next 60 seconds, I need you to understand that my team has been in position since this afternoon. We planned for this contingency. Trust the plan. I trusted the plan. I did not stop counting. 31, 32. On the screen, the 4 signals surrounding Julian's stopped dot had ceased moving. They were parked on the highway around him. I could not see what was happening between the signals. The tracking system showed me locations, not events. It showed me geometry, 4 points arranged around a fifth, and left me to supply the rest from imagination, which was worse. 45, 46. Contact, Pryor said, a single word clipped and immediate. And then, on Caleb's screen, 6 new signals appeared from the north, moving fast, converging on the cluster from the opposite direction, surrounding the surrounding vehicles, the way a hand closes around a fist. The 4 signals that had been closing on Julian stopped moving, all of them, simultaneously. Caleb exhaled a long, controlled breath that he had been holding. I realized for approximately the last 45 seconds. He looked at me, and something in his face loosened by exactly 1 degree, which was how Caleb Marsh expressed profound relief. Pryor's got them, he said. Into the phone, I heard voices, commands, responses, the organized noise of a law enforcement operation, executing exactly as it had been designed to execute. Then Pryor's voice, closer, directed at me. Julian is out of the vehicle. He's on his feet. Walter, he's holding the drive. My knees very briefly did something I would not describe to anyone. I sat back down in the wooden chair. Is he hurt? I asked. Ante shaken, Pryor said. Vehicle damage from the spike strip. He hit the median barrier at reduced speed. Airbag deployed. A pause. He's standing, he's talking, and Walter. Another pause, this one different from the others. Heavier. He's holding the drive out toward my agent, both hands, like he's been waiting for someone to take it. I looked at Caleb across the workbench. Caleb looked at me. Neither of us said anything because there was nothing to say that the moment had not already said more clearly than we could. I picked up my phone. Pryor, I said. Bring him in safe. Before I reveal what Vance's attorney walked into that courtroom, believing he could pull off, and what brought the whole thing crashing down, leave justice in the comments. One word. I want to see how many of you are still here, still with Walter, still waiting for this. One more note, the story ahead weaves in fictional details to deepen its impact. If you'd rather not continue, this is a good moment to step away, but if you stay, I promise what comes next is worth it. There was one thing Pryor said the next morning that I am going to tell you first before the sequence of events because it is the thing that stayed with me longest. He said that when he walked up to Julian Sterling, standing in the middle of I-75 at 11:19 p.m., with the hard drive held out in both hands, Julian's face was not the face of a man who had lost. It was the face of a man who had finally put something down that had been too heavy to carry for too long. The spike strip had been deployed 40 yards north of where the 4 Sterling vehicles had boxed Julian in, placed in the darkness beyond their headlights invisible, until Julian's sedan hit it at 62 miles per hour, and the front tires blew simultaneously. The car pulled hard left, crossed the center lane, and struck the concrete median barrier at an angle that crumpled the front quarter panel and triggered the driver's side airbag. The sedan came to rest, tilted against the barrier engine, still running hazard lights blinking on, automatically, a small, absurd detail I could not stop thinking about afterward. The car programmed to signal distress, doing its one job faithfully in the middle of everything else that was happening. Julian had pushed the airbag down and gotten the door open before Pryor's vehicles reached him. He was standing outside when the 6 SUVs came in from the north, with their lights running and their sirens cutting the night open, one hand braced against the roof because his legs were not entirely reliable, the other holding the hard drive against his chest. There was a gash above his left eyebrow where his head had struck the doorframe. The mark had dried dark against his skin in the cold air, and in the glare of 6 sets of headlights it made him look. Pryor said like a man who had been through something real. The 4 Sterling contractors made the rapid professional calculation that 4 men against 6 law enforcement vehicles with unknown backup was not a situation that rewarded aggression. They were ordered out, searched, restrained, and read their rights in approximately 4 minutes, charged that night with reckless endangerment, criminal threatening, and conspiracy. Pryor walked up to Julian alone. Julian watched him come, without moving his back against the crumpled sedan, the hard drive against his chest. The expression of a man who has stopped running and is waiting to find out what stopping costs. "Mr. Sterling, I'm Devin Pryor, Florida Department of Law Enforcement. I need to advise you of your rights before we speak." Julian nodded, a single exhausted dip of his chin. Pryor read the Miranda warning in full. Julian listened without interrupting the behavior Pryor noted of a man who understood the words and had already decided they did not change what he was going to do next. "The men my father sent," Julian said when Pryor finished. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Are they in custody?" "All 4, Pryor said. Julian closed his eyes, opened them. The hand holding the drive loosened its grip, and he held it out toward Pryor, both hands extended like an offering or a surrender, or something that partook of both without being entirely either. 7 years, Julian said. Every transaction, every shell company, every payment to every person who ever took money to look the other way. My father kept meticulous records because he believed documentation was power. He never considered that someone else might use the documentation differently. Pryor took the drive. "Are you providing this voluntarily without coercion of your own free will?" "Yes." No hesitation, no qualification. Julian lowered his hands, looked out at the tire marks where his car had swerved the broken median barrier, the line of Pryor's vehicles with their lights still running in the Florida night. "Agent Pryor, my wife's name is Claire Greer Sterling. She is somewhere safe because her father is a better man than I have been." His jaw tightened. Something moved through his face that was grief and shame and the particular expression of a person confronting the distance between who they intended to be and who they actually were. "I need her to know I tried, at the end, that I did one thing right." "I'll make sure she knows," Pryor said. Then Julian's legs gave out. Not a collapse. He simply sat down against the crumpled sedan, the way a man sits when he has been standing on willpower alone for 48 hours, and the willpower has run its course. He sat on the asphalt with his knees up and his face in his hands, and his shoulders shook with something that was not crying exactly, but lived in the same neighborhood as crying and hurt just as much. Pryor crouched down beside him. He did not say it was going to be all right. He said, "We've got you. You're safe now. Stay right here." Pryor stood up, walked 20 feet north, and called me. "It's done," he said. "Julian is with us. The drive is in my hand." A pause. "Walter, it's done." I pressed my free hand flat against my sternum, against the place where something had been wound tight for 4 days, and felt it loosen by 1 full degree. "Go read it," I said. "Call me when you know." I hung up. Caleb was looking at me from across the workbench. "Well," he said. I looked at my oldest friend, the man who had driven 40 minutes in the rain, without asking why, wrapped my daughter's ribs with steady hands, placed a tracking device under a vehicle in a crowd, and sent me one word when it was done. "It's done," I said. Caleb picked up his coffee, drank it, set it down. "Good," he said. Pryor called back at 2:41 a.m. I had not moved from the wooden chair in Caleb's garage. Caleb had fallen asleep in his own chair 20 minutes earlier, head back, arms crossed, breathing with the deep regularity of a man whose conscience permitted him the luxury of sleep at 2 in the morning because he had done everything that was required of him and done it correctly. I had watched him sleep and felt a complicated affection for him that I did not have the vocabulary to properly describe, the kind of feeling that accumulates between men over decades and never gets said out loud and does not need to be. I answered on the first ring. "Walter," Pryor said. His voice was different from the voice that had said, "It's done," 90 minutes earlier. That voice had been relieved. This voice was something else, tighter, more electric. The voice of a man who has opened a box expecting to find something significant and has found something that exceeds the category of significant entirely. "Tell me," I said. "I'm sitting in my car in the parking lot of the Sarasota field office." he said, with my laptop connected to the drive, and I need you to understand something before I tell you what's on it. I need you to understand that in 19 years of financial crimes investigation, I have never not once seen documentation this complete. My hand tightened on the phone. How complete, I said. 7 years of dual ledger accounting, 2 parallel financial systems running simultaneously, one for public filings, one for everything else. He paused, and I heard the sound of him scrolling, clicking, moving through files. 17 separate real estate development projects used as laundering vehicles. The money comes in as investor capital gets cycled through construction cost overruns that don't correspond to any actual construction and comes out as clean revenue. Another pause. Walter, there are wire transfer records going back to 2017. Every shell company, every offshore account, every intermediary. It's all annotated. Vance Sterling kept notes on his own transactions the way an academic keeps footnotes. And the officials, I asked. The names Harwick gave us, all 23 of them, Pryor said. Confirmed and expanded. There are 31 names in this file, Walter. Judges, commissioners, state legislators, a federal procurement officer in Tampa. His voice tightened further. This goes considerably higher than Manatee County. I sat with that for a moment. Outside, the first suggestion of pre-dawn gray was beginning at the edge of the tree line, not light, yet just the absence of full darkness, the sky deciding which direction it intended to go. What do you need? I asked. I need to make 2 calls, Pryor said. The first one is to the FBI field office in Tampa. This crosses into federal jurisdiction on the money laundering alone, and I need them brought in tonight while everything is still moving too fast for Sterling's people to get ahead of it. The second call is to a federal magistrate judge in the Middle District of Florida, a judge I have used before and trust who is not on this list. A pause. I need asset freezes and a passport hold on Vance Sterling in place before the sun comes up. If he wakes up tomorrow morning with his accounts accessible and his passport in his desk drawer, we have a problem. Make the calls, I said. I will. But Walter, he stopped. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped a register, quieter, more direct to the voice he used when he was saying something he wanted to make sure landed correctly. There is one more thing on this drive, a folder labeled with Julian's initials. Inside it are copies of the documents Julian gathered when he was trying to leave the apartment listings in Tampa, the correspondence with the family law attorney in Sarasota, the bank statements from the separate account before it was frozen. A long pause. He had been planning it for 14 months, Walter. He had a whole life mapped out. 2 plane tickets purchased for a Friday in April Tampa to Denver. He was going to take Claire somewhere no one from the Sterling family had connections. The garage was very quiet. I looked at Caleb sleeping in his chair. I looked at the topographic map still spread on the workbench. I looked at the cold coffee in my cup and the grain of the wooden table and the crack in the concrete floor that had been there since Caleb poured the slab 12 years ago. He bought 2 tickets, I said. My voice came out lower than I intended. Tampa to Denver, April 19th. Pryor's voice was careful. The departure date was 3 weeks after the night in the wine cellar. I pressed my eyes shut for a moment. Behind them, I saw Claire at 9 years old, gap-toothed, laughing at something I had said at the kitchen table, in a house that was full then. I saw her at 22, graduating in the rain because the outdoor ceremony had not been moved indoors, and she had laughed about it. I saw her standing in my doorway in the October rain, with her arm pressed against her ribs. I opened my eyes. Make your calls, Devin, I said. Do what needs to be done. I will. A brief pause. Get some sleep, Walter. The next 72 hours are going to be loud. He hung up. I sat in the garage for another few minutes, listening to Caleb breathe and the night insects and the distant sound of a train moving through the Manatee County darkness somewhere to the east. Then I picked up my phone and opened the contact I had saved under a name that was not Marcus Webb's name, because I had learned over the past 4 days to be careful about what I kept in searchable form. I sent one text, 4 words. It's time. Move now. Marcus Webb, 40 years old, investigative reporter for the Bradenton Herald, had been sitting on the most significant story of his career for 4 days, with the professional discipline of a man who understood that timing was not a courtesy. It was the difference between a story that changed things and a story that got buried by a Friday news cycle and forgotten by Monday morning. He did not reply to my text. He did not need to. At his desk in the Herald's Bradenton office, as I learned later from the piece he published and from the conversation we had the following week over lunch at a diner on Manatee Avenue, Marcus Webb had been ready since the moment the encrypted file arrived in his mailbox 4 days earlier. He had verified every document. He had cross-referenced every name against Public Records Court, filings, property transfers, campaign finance disclosures. He had written 4 different versions of the lead paragraph, trying to find the one that was true without being incendiary accurate, without being careful in the way that protected the wrong people. He had his editors on standby. He had his legal team on standby. He had a photographer whose work was already formatted and captioned. When my text arrived at 2:58 a.m., Marcus Webb pressed publish. I did not know that yet sitting in Caleb's garage. I only knew that I had done the last thing that was mine to do. Tommy Marsh called. At 3:15 he had been working through the night at Frank's kitchen table, and his voice had the wired, slightly elevated energy of a 22-year-old law student who has been running on coffee and purpose for 16 hours. The civil lawsuit filing was complete, he said. It would be submitted electronically to the Middle District Court at 8 a.m. when the clerk's office opened. Tommy, I said. Yeah. Go to sleep. A pause. Almost, he said. I want to make sure Tommy. I kept my voice even. You have done everything. It is done. Go to sleep. A longer pause. Then quietly, yes, sir. He hung up. I set my phone down on the workbench. Across the garage, Caleb made a small sound in his sleep and shifted in his chair and settled again. I looked at the crack in the concrete floor. I thought about Vance Sterling asleep in his house on the hill, or perhaps not asleep, perhaps sitting in his third-floor office looking out at the water, the way powerful men sometimes do when they sense without being able to articulate why that the ground under them has changed. His accounts would be frozen before he woke up. His passport would be flagged before he made his morning coffee. And at 2:58 a.m., while he slept or sat and looked at the water, the story of what he had built and what it had cost had begun moving through the internet at the speed that information moves when it is true and documented and has been waiting for a long time to be told. I thought about all of that. Then I thought about Claire asleep at Caleb's cabin with Nora Pryor nearby, and her injuries still healing, and the mark on her wrist that Nora had dressed twice already. I closed my eyes. For the first time in 4 days, I slept. I woke up at 7:43 a.m. in Caleb's back bedroom, in the narrow cot that was the only bed the cabin offered, with the particular disorientation of a man who has slept 4 hours after being awake for the better part of 4 days, and whose body does not immediately know what to make of the sudden darkness and silence. Then I remembered. I sat up and reached for my phone on the floor beside the cot. 47 missed calls, 63 text messages, 6 voicemails, none from numbers I recognized. I set the phone face down on the cot and sat on the edge of the mattress with my hands on my knees and breathed for a moment, just breathe the way you do when you need to remind yourself that the world outside your ribcage is going to require something from you, and you need to find it before you walk into it. Then I picked the phone back up and called Caleb. "Kitchen," he said. "Coffee's on." The kitchen of Caleb's cabin smelled like coffee and the bacon he had made at some point while I was sleeping, and the particular smell of a Florida morning coming through an open window, salt and pine, and the faint green smell of things growing in the humidity. Caleb was at the table with his own phone, reading something on the screen, with the concentrated, methodical attention he gave to everything. He turned the phone to face me when I sat down. The Bradenton Herald's website, Marcus Webb's byline at the top of a piece that ran, Caleb told me to 6,040 words, and had been shared as of 7 minutes ago more than 40,000 times. The headline was simple. Marcus had understood that the material did not need embellishment. Sterling development, 7 years of fraud, 31 officials and the county. That looked the other way. I poured my coffee, sat down, read. Marcus Webb had written the piece the way the best journalists write the most important stories of their careers, without flourish, without visible anger, with a precision of language that trusted the facts to carry the weight, because the facts were in this case more than sufficient. He had named names. He had cited documents. He had included photographs of wire transfer authorizations, of shell company registrations, of a text message between Vance Sterling and Sheriff Dale Harwick that read in its entirety, "Handled. Don't follow up." He had included a photograph of the Sterling Estate's wine cellar, taken from what the caption described as security footage obtained by law enforcement, which showed the room empty and the camera mount on the wall and the cable running to the corner. He had not included Claire. Not her name, not her image, not a single identifying detail. He had written a family member of a Sterling employee and left it at that, and I felt reading those 4 words a gratitude so specific and physical that my eyes burned with it for a moment before I pressed it back down. My phone buzzed on the table. I looked at the screen. Pryor. "Are you awake?" he said. "Since 7:43, I said. "The Herald piece went national at 6 a.m., he said. "A P picked it up at 6:12. By the time you were waking up, it was on the front page of the Tampa Bay Times website, the Miami Herald, and 3 national outlets." A pause. "My office phone has not stopped ringing since 5:30. "What kind of calls?" "2 kinds, Pryor said. "The first kind is from other agencies, state, federal, asking to be read and offering resources, wanting to know what they can do. That kind is useful." A brief pause. "The second kind is from attorneys representing people whose names appear in the Herald piece, calling to discuss cooperation options before their clients' names appear in a criminal filing." He let that sit for a moment. "Walter, I have had 4 calls this morning from attorneys representing 4 different individuals on that list of 31. All 4 attorneys use the same phrase. Word for word, my client would like to discuss cooperation options." I drank my coffee. "They're running," I said. "They're walking very quickly toward the exit," Pryor said, "which in federal criminal proceedings is the same thing and is considerably more useful to me." Another pause. "The civil lawsuit Tommy filed at 8 this morning creates a public record that every name on that list is now attached to. They have approximately 48 hours before federal grand jury proceedings begin, at which point the cooperation window starts to close. They know this. Their attorneys know this." His voice carried the controlled satisfaction of a man who has spent 3 years pushing against a wall and is feeling it begin to give. "They are calling me." I looked out Caleb's kitchen window at the October morning. The light was gold and clear, the kind of Florida morning that made you understand why people moved here before you understood what the money had done to the place and what the place had allowed the money to do. "The Pelican Cove Town Council," I said. "The local reaction." The mayor issued a statement at 7 a.m., calling for a full independent review. Pryor said with a dryness in his voice that communicated precisely what he thought of that statement. "The county commissioner who appears in Webb's piece as recipient of $65,000 in sterling payments canceled his 9 o'clock press conference and has not been reachable since. The Pelican Cove Chamber of Commerce issued a statement saying they were deeply concerned and committed to transparency." A pause. "The Sterling Development Corp. offices on Cortez Road are locked. The parking lot is empty. The sign is still lit. At 9:15, I called Marcus Webb. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the particular exhausted brightness of a man who has not slept and does not care because the work is done and it is the right work. "Mr. Greer," he said. "Marcus," I said. "You wrote it the right way." A pause. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, stripped of the professional brightness. "I've been doing this for 14 years, he said. "I've written stories that mattered to me. This is the first one that I knew while I was writing it was going to change something real." Another pause. "How is she?" He did not say Claire's name. He did not need to. "She's going to be fine," I said. "She's going to be more than fine." Marcus exhaled slowly. "Good," he said. "That's good." His voice caught slightly on the second word, a small fracture quickly recovered. "If there's anything else you need from me, Mr. Greer, anything at all." "There's one more thing," I said. "Not yet, but I'll call you when it's time." I was thinking about Vance Sterling in his office on the 21st floor of a building in Sarasota, with his accounts frozen and his passport flagged and the story of everything he had built, running at 40,000 shares and climbing. I hung up and sat at Caleb's kitchen table and watched the light move across the floor as the morning advanced. At 11:40, Pryor called again. "The Pelican Cove Town Council called an emergency session," he said. All 7 members voted to suspend their contracts with Sterling Development Corp. Pending investigation. That is $420 million in active projects. He paused. Walter, the banks that carried the Sterling Development loans are calling their relationship managers. 2 have already issued notices of technical default based on the fraud allegations. The money is moving away from him, I said. The money evaporated, Pryor said. In about 6 hours, Vance Sterling went from being one of the most financially secure men in Southwest Florida to a man whose assets are frozen, whose business partners are issuing defaults, whose employees are not coming in, and whose name is on the front page of every newspaper in the state. A pause. And he hasn't made a single public statement. No, I said. He won't. You sound certain. I am, I said. Vance Sterling has spent 40 years controlling every story that touched him. He is not going to speak publicly now because he knows that anything he says becomes part of a record he no longer controls. I looked at the window at the gold October light. He's going to sit in that office and wait. For what? For whatever comes next, I said. Because that is what men like Vance Sterling do. They don't run, they don't beg, they wait because waiting has always been how they survived. And this time, what's coming next is going to arrive regardless of how long he waits for it. Pryor was quiet for a moment. I have a judge signing the arrest warrant at 6 p.m., he said. FBI Tampa is coordinating. We go in tomorrow morning 9 a.m. A pause. Walter, I want you to know everything that happens tomorrow is clean. Everything your daughter went through, everything Gideon did, everything Julian gave us. It all goes in through the front door of a federal courthouse with documentation so complete that Vance Sterling's attorneys are going to need to bill him for the extra paper. My throat tightened. Thank you, Devin, I said. He paused. Thank you, he said quietly, for bringing me the right door. At 8:47 that evening, Pryor called one final time. Someone just knocked on my office door, he said. I'm going to need to call you back. He didn't call back that night. He didn't need to, because at 9:11 p.m. Caleb looked at his phone and showed me a text from Tommy, who had apparently been monitoring Pryor's building from a coffee shop 2 blocks away with the unstoppable energy of a 22-year-old law student who had spent a week in the middle of the most significant case he would ever touch. Tommy's text said, 3 people in the lobby, all with lawyers, all carrying boxes. Caleb set his phone down on the workbench and looked at me. 3 more, he said. I looked at the crack in the concrete floor. 3 more, I said. Day 6 began the way the previous 5 had, not quietly. No tracking screens, no GPS signals, no countdowns in seconds. Just Caleb's cabin, the smell of coffee and a mockingbird outside running through its borrowed catalog of other bird songs, with the cheerful plagiarism mockingbirds have always considered a virtue. Claire was awake when I knocked at 7:30. Sitting up in the cot with tea, Nora had brought her reading a paperback from Caleb's shelf. Her left eye was open now. Both eyes looked up at me when I came in, and I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight since the moment I opened my front door 5 nights ago. Hey, Dad, she said. 2 words, the most ordinary 2 words in the English language. They had never sounded the way they sounded that morning. We talked for an hour about nothing important, a book, a restaurant in Tampa, the way morning light came through the cabin window and made the dust motes look suspended in amber. We talked the way people talk when what they need is simply to hear each other's voices. At 8:30, Nora came in to check Claire's ribs. I went to the kitchen and called Pryor. 11, he said without preamble. 11 individuals from the list of 31 had contacted his office through legal counsel seeking cooperation agreements. 3 judges, 4 elected officials, 2 county department heads, a state procurement officer. All with lawyers, all offering everything documents, testimony, recorded conversations some had kept as their own insurance. Were they all coerced? I asked. Or did some choose it? Pryor was quiet longer than usual. Both, he said finally. But most of them made one bad decision when the pressure was high and the exit looked too narrow, and spent 20 years still carrying it. I thought about Frank sitting at his kitchen table with a pen he had been holding for 2 years. At 2 in the afternoon, Caleb and I sat in the garage, him cleaning a carburetor with a brush the size of a toothbrush. Me in the wooden chair with coffee gone cold. Are you doing okay? Caleb asked. I'm trying to figure out what okay feels like, I said. He set the brush down. Claire laughed this morning, a real one. I heard it from the kitchen. He picked the brush back up. That's what okay feels like. You just forgot what regular sound sounds like after listening to sirens for so long. At 4:17, Pryor's voice shifted registers when he called. Vance Sterling hasn't left the building, he said. His keycard accessed the 21st floor at 4:52 a.m., 2 hours before the Herald piece went live. Walter he knew before the story broke. He watched his accounts go to zero and his passport go red. And then he stayed. I straightened in the chair. He's waiting, I said. For what? For it to end on his terms. Even now. That's the only thing he has left controlling how he's seen when the door opens. And he intends to keep it. Pryor was quiet. Warrant is signed. The FBI goes in tomorrow at 9. I hung up. Caleb looked at me, brush in hand. Tomorrow, I said. Caleb set the brush down. I stood up. I'll make dinner, he said. The most ordinary sufficient thing. Not okay. Now it's almost over. Just dinner. I went and got Claire and Nora, set plates out, and the four of us sat around the table in the Florida pines as the October evening came down soft and dark and full of insects that had no idea what had happened this week and were simply glad to be alive in the warm dark. Claire ate 2 full plates. I watched her and thought, there it is. That is what okay feels like. The FBI arrived at Sterling Development on Pineapple Avenue at 9 o'clock exactly. I was not there. I was sitting in Caleb's garage with Claire beside me, watching the local Sarasota News affiliate on his laptop. Someone at the station had received a tip and had a camera crew across the street since 8:45. Claire's hand found mine on the workbench. She held it the way she used to when she was small, and something frightened her, and she wanted contact without wanting to admit it. I held her hand back, and we watched the building, and I counted the seconds the way I had counted them 3 nights ago on a highway in Manatee County. The camera couldn't reach the 21st floor. Pryor told me what happened up there. That evening, same Waffle House, same terrible coffee. He said the door to Vance Sterling's office was not locked. He said Vance was sitting behind his desk in a charcoal gray suit, beautifully cut, the kind he had worn every working day for 40 years, and was not going to change today of all days. On the desk, coffee still steaming. The Wall Street Journal open to the markets section, a legal pad with 3 lines of handwriting, abandoned mid-sentence. Vance looked up when the agents came through the door. He did not stand. He did not reach for anything. He looked at Pryor, and for just a moment, one unguarded second, something moved across his face that was not the controlled expression I had seen at a wedding reception 3 years ago. The expression of a man understanding fully and finally that the accounting has been completed and the numbers came out the way they were always going to come out. Then the mask came back. The lead agent read the arrest warrant. Vance listened without blinking. When it was finished, he set his coffee cup down carefully on the coaster, the way a man does a thing 10,000 times, until it requires no thought at all. He looked at Pryor. I've been waiting, he said, for you to find the right door. Quiet. Even. No defiance, no defeat. The statement of a man who had known since 4 in the morning that this was coming and had used those hours to decide exactly how he would conduct himself in this room. He stood up on his own schedule, straightened his jacket, adjusted his cuffs, held out his wrists. At 9:12, the camera caught them emerging through the main doors, 8 agents and 1 man in a charcoal gray suit, walking at a pace that was not hurried and not slow. Vance did not look at the camera. He looked straight ahead at the black SUV with its rear door already open. He got in. The door closed. The vehicle pulled into ordinary Sarasota morning traffic and became within 2 blocks simply a black car among other cars. Claire squeezed my hand. I looked at her. Both eyes open now, the marks fading at their edges, the color of something finally beginning to heal. And in her expression, something I had not seen in years of photographs and video calls and 2 short visits to a house on a hill, where she always kept one eye on the door. She looked free. Not happy yet, but free. I put my arm around her shoulders gently on the right side, where her ribs were whole, and she leaned against me, and the laptop screen moved on to the weather forecast, and Caleb came in with 3 cups of coffee and looked at the meteorologist on the screen. Done, he said. Done, I said. My phone buzzed, a number I did not recognize, an area code I did not immediately place. I picked it up, because 7 days ago I had learned that the calls you do not expect are sometimes the ones you need to take. The area code was from a federal detention facility in Tampa. I answered on the third ring. Julian Sterling's voice was tired in a way that had nothing performed about it, stripped of everything down to the plain fact of a man who has done what he has done and is no longer pretending otherwise. Mr. Greer, I'm not calling to ask for anything. I need you to understand that first. I'm listening, Julian, I said. I loved her. His voice caught a small fracture, quickly steadied. I know that doesn't balance against what happened. I know it doesn't excuse what I failed to do. But I need someone who matters to her to know it was real, that she was never just... He stopped, breathed through it. I sat on Caleb's workbench stool and thought about a folder on a hard drive, 2 plane tickets to Denver, 14 months of planning, separate accounts consultations with attorneys, apartment listings in a city far enough away that the Sterling name did not reach. I thought about a man standing in a doorway on a Friday night, watching something happen he could not stop, that years of his father's control had made him too hollowed out to stop. Guilty and a casualty of the same thing simultaneously. I hear you, Julian, I said, not I forgive you, not it's going to be all right, just I hear you. Thank you, he said, low, genuine. What comes next, the legal part that's between you and the courts? I won't speak to it. I paused. But who you choose to be after that is entirely yours. Don't waste it. A long silence, the kind where someone is actually absorbing something rather than waiting to speak. Yes, sir, he said. I hung up, set the phone on the workbench, looked at the crack in Caleb's concrete floor, and let the past 7 days move through me the way water moves through a place it has been held back from. Not a flood, just a flow finding the level it was always going to find. The kitchen door opened. Claire stood in the doorway, backlit by morning light. She was smiling, the real one, the one that used the whole left side of her face and reached her eyes and made her look for a moment like the gap-toothed 9-year-old who used to sit on the back porch with me, asking questions I did not always know how to answer. My chest ached. I realized slowly it was joy. I had forgotten how joy feels when it arrives, after a long absence, how it aches almost like grief, how the eyes burn the same way for both. Who was that? She asked. Wrong number, I said. She looked at me long enough to know it wasn't, short enough to understand it was handled. Okay, she said. Nora made eggs, coming in. In a minute, I said. She went back inside. Through the open door, I heard Caleb say something that made Claire laugh. That real laugh, the one I had gone 7 days without the one Caleb had heard through the kitchen wall yesterday morning, and reported to me with the quiet accuracy of a man who notices what matters. Devin Pryor appeared in the garage doorway, plain jacket, dark jeans. He looked at me on the stool. He did not extend his hand or offer a summary or say anything at all. He simply nodded, once, slowly. Then he turned and walked to his car and drove away, and I listened to the tires on the gravel until I could not hear them anymore. Caleb came in with 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of me, sat down on the other stool without ceremony, the way he had been sitting beside me in difficult moments for 25 years, not to fix anything, just to be in the same room. I picked up the coffee, hot, strong, the way he always made it, because he had been paying attention for 25 years, and paying attention was how Caleb Marsh expressed everything he did not say out loud. I want to tell you one thing before I go. I did not win this because I was smart enough or because I had the right people. I won because the people who stood beside me, Caleb Gideon, Frank Devin Pryor, Tommy Marcus Webb, Rosa Delgado, with her 31 pages of careful handwriting, none of them were there because I paid them. They were there because they had reasons of their own. And the reasons people carry inside themselves, the ones that belong to them entirely, those are the ones that do not bend when things get hard. Vance Sterling had money, infrastructure, 40 years of leverage. What he did not have was a single person who stood beside him because they chose to. That was the difference. That has always been the difference. If something tells you the people around your children are wrong, if a voice goes flat over the phone, if a hand hides where it should not have to listen, act on it. Loving someone without acting on that love is just a feeling about yourself, dressed up as something you are doing for them. I am Walter Greer. I am 70 years old. I have a daughter who ate 2 full plates of eggs this morning and laughed at something Caleb said and asked me if I wanted to try that restaurant in Tampa next week. I told her yes. Hold the people you love close. Watch who you hand them to. And if you know a father who needs to hear this, share it with him. I will see you in the next one. I have told you this family story not because I am proud of every choice I made, but because I am honest about the ones I didn't make soon enough. I waited too long. I saw the signs and told myself I was wrong. I love my daughter and called that love protection. But love is not enough on its own. Love is a decision you make every day, and most importantly, on the days when making it costs you something. God put people in my path who had reasons of their own to stand beside me. Caleb, Gideon, Frank, Devin Pryor, Rosa with her 31 pages of careful handwriting. I did not deserve all of them, but they came anyway. My advice to you is simple. Don't be the father I was in those 14 months. If something feels wrong about the people surrounding your child, trust it. Act on it. The discomfort of being wrong is survivable. The alternative is not always. This is a family story about power and silence and what happens when both finally break. It is also a family story about family betrayal, not just of a daughter by a family she married into, but of a father by his own fear. Family betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people who love you most and are simply too afraid to move. I believe that. I lived it. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. Tell me about someone who stood by you when it mattered. Share this with a father who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, consider this your sign. Family betrayal leaves marks, but the right people help you heal them. Thank you for staying with me until the end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted for reflection and understanding. If that's not for you, no hard feelings. Choose what serves you best. But if you're staying, I'll see you in the next one.